Our first viewer has a question about children. You say this: I have no idea why these kids keep coming into my room and taking money out of my room, my jewelry one day, and now candy that I've taken from them. I'm fed up with this crap. I have disciplined them constantly. First, I spanked them like my mom did, which was all I knew to do. I was scared to death to ever take anything from my mom, but these kids apparently are not. And I'm scared to death of this continuing to happen and these kids robbing me blind. Growing up, my mom never stopped my brother from taking my things, and it was hell. I'm freaked out about this being my life, living with my own children. I swear I just want to kill them, and I'm afraid of even bringing a lover into my home and having them steal from him too. They haven't yet. However, my daughter in the past has taken things from school. This is outrageous. How and what the heck does one do to get it to stop? I'm so freaking frustrated. It looks like I'm not a good parent and that I should have let someone else adopt them, as maybe they could have had more respect for them and this lesson if somebody else had taught it to them, because I've failed miserably. This does sound pretty miserable. As far as, and I'm embarrassed to even tell anybody about this because then they're going to think that I'm a stupid parent and think that I have thieves for children. It's scary. It's embarrassing. And I don't want to be without someone because I'm hiding my kids' bad choices for behavior. And I don't want to expose anybody else to it. So it's frustrating and hurtful and all that. Kids do what they do. They tend to do bad things. Lie, be angry, be rebellious, steal, and so on, because there's something missing. And so it's hard to tell what your kids' ages are, but it sounds like they're quite capable of understanding you speak. 3-year-olds don't go into your room and steal. Actually, 3-year-olds steal everything, but they don't see it as stealing. They think everything's theirs. So if they're old enough to steal and to hide things, they're almost certainly old enough for you to teach them some principles. So here would be an example of where you could sit down with these kids and read the parenting book to them, probably the whole thing, but at the very least excerpts that you've prepared to help them understand how you've gotten into this position, and to explain to them that you're being angry at them because, like you say here, I could just kill them. Well, I'm sure that gets across to them just fine. And to a child, that's just a devastating message. Now, I understand your frustration. I'm not criticizing your being frustrated with them, but it has a terrible effect on them. So explain that to them. Say, I should have taught you better than this, and it's been my mistake. So we're going to continue to teach you, but I'm going to do this without the anger and the disappointment. So why do we not steal? You see, most of the time, we just tell kids don't do a thing. So first you're going to explain why they do steal and lie, because everybody who steals is lying. And then what are the reasons not to? That it's about being considerate of other people and helping them to feel loved. How do they feel, you might ask them, when you are loving and kind to them? And how would they feel if in the middle of the night while they were sleeping, you were to come into their room and take all their favorite toys, for example? They wouldn't like it. And they wouldn't like it because, not just because the toy would be missing, but because now they'd be lying there in bed at night, afraid to go to sleep because they know you were going to come in and steal their stuff. It's about losing trust for people when they steal things from you. And you explain to them that that's the feeling that everybody has when they're stolen from. And it's also a sign that we don't care about them. So what you're looking for in your family is a sense of responsibility and caring so that your family can be happy. You help kids understand why there are rules, as opposed to, now I have, how many times have I told you not to? It's pretty obvious they're not responding to that. They're not responding to hitting. Surprise. Of course, you haven't tried electrocution. That was a joke. But they're not going to respond to any kind of punitive measures. So you love them and teach them. You love them and teach them again. And if with your increased loving of them and teaching them about, why they do it and why it's best not to, then if they don't respond, only then do you start imposing consequences. Always do loving and teaching a bunch of times first. We tend to go straight to the consequences. Now you have to live out in the shed with the cows and the pigs. So if they keep doing it, then what you'll do is you'll describe, this is just one way. This isn't the way. You can come up with your own consequences. But many parents can't even think of one. So I'm just kind of giving you an example. You could, for example, describe the things that you know have been stolen and tell them that you want them back by the next day at a certain time. Everything that you know is missing. And they either have to return the thing or they have to describe to you, they have to tell you that they took it. And then you tell them that if those things are not returned, then you'll start removing some of their things. Now, if you don't know who did it, now I'm just going to make up that you have 2 kids because I can't really tell here. It's a virtual certainty that the other kids know who's stealing the stuff. And because usually they take it and they show it off. Almost invariably, they're really proud of what they've taken from your room. That's how criminals get caught too, by the way. They tell people. And so you tell all the kids that you're just going to start taking from everybody. So first you'll pack up the television, or you'll take it from the living room to your room. Then you'll start packing up their toys and then perhaps their favorite clothes, whatever. With some parents, we've even gotten to the place where they've removed all the kids' clothes except for one set of clothes. One. Which is pretty inconvenient for school because then the kid has to come home and wash that one set of clothes while wearing sweats or pajamas or whatever, and then have them ready for school the next day. A lot of different ways that you can make their lives inconvenient without being angry, to let them know that stealing is not an option. Now, we could pick another, but this is not the preferred one, because when somebody does the wrong thing, you want to make it inconvenient for them, not inconvenient for you. But let's say that were not to work, which would be very unlikely if you really do this. If you really make their lives inconvenient enough, the stealing will stop and they'll return your things. But let's say it didn't work. You could, for example, put a lock with a padlock on the outside of your door, or just one of those little door locks that has a key, so that whenever you go in your room, there has to be a key to enter it. But see, that inconveniences you more than it inconveniences them. So it's important that they be put out by the consequences of their choices. Now, some of the kids, and this will be interesting, by the way, because I've seen this done and instructed parents to do it. Let's say that you have 2 kids and you say, all right, then I'm going to start removing things from both of your rooms. If there is a kid who has not been stealing, that kid will immediately say, that's not fair. And then you'll know who the thief is. So it's kind of sneaky. But the idea is that the most important thing is that you teach them and you don't become irritated at them. Consequences last. The writer that wrote that question apparently is here with us live, and said, oh my gosh, as I listened to Greg reading the question, I realized I was so angry that now it's comical. I'm glad I didn't kill them. Well, I'm glad you didn't kill them either. Be shame to end their lives before you taught them something, and shame to spend the rest of yours in prison. So give this a shot. It can be very effective. Here's a viewer who says, when is it appropriate and beneficial in a relationship, either platonic or romantic, to share highly personal aspects of yourself or your past? In previous relationships, there have been times that I've said too much too soon and scared the other person off, but other times I spoke too late, which left the person feeling as though I was keeping things from them. So what is the middle ground? I've considered that the problem may be more in the way that I approach the disclosures than in the timing of them, but I don't quite have the full picture of this yet. And I got to tell you, before I say anything else, you won't have the full picture of it until you probably make a bunch of those mistakes. You do too much, you do too little, and with practice you kind of figure it out. But as a guideline, I suggest that you tell people the truth as quickly as they can hear it. So let's say you're with a friend and you're telling them a little bit about yourself. Well, I can be impatient. I can be unkind with people. I was selfish yesterday with my boss or my boyfriend or whoever. And if they look at you and go, wow, that is really cool. I've never heard anybody, tell the truth about themselves like that and own responsibility for how they feel and for how they behave. When somebody does that, then you tell them a little more. And I don't mean necessarily do all of these steps in one sitting, but you tell them a little more, and when you can see that they're going, oh, it's almost like watching somebody eat a meal, really. If somebody's eating a meal and they're shoving food in their mouths as fast as they can go, well, they're still hungry. And so if you're describing yourself and they're going, whoa, that is so cool, bring it on. Well, there's your clue. You can see it in their face. Whereas if you tell them something, they go, well, I was thinking of going to the mall. They're not interested in hearing any more about you. Or if they hear what you're saying, and then after you've told them 2 or 3 things, you can just kind of tell that they're done. They're not really interested in learning a lot more. Just practice watching them as you do it. They lose interest, or they may, for example, quibble with you and say, well, no, I don't think you were really selfish. You might try one more little thing, but they're kind of already showing you that they're resistant to the idea of your being fully honest. And that's how you experiment. It's what they're ready to receive, not what you're ready to tell. That would be the biggest single clue. Here's a viewer who says, every time I speak to my husband about upcoming holiday plans, he simply will not give me an answer as to what he would like to do this year. Being that Thanksgiving is right around the corner, I'm finding that I'm allowing this to make me angry. Nice description, by the way. You are allowing it to make you angry. In fact, whenever I bring up a subject that has anything to do with some level of seriousness, like finances, arrangements, where we're going to go, he never wants to talk about it or make any kind of decision. See, that's very useful to know, and really probably would have been something I would have guessed at, because there are many people who just hate making decisions. And they hate making them partly because they haven't had a lot of experience with it, but mostly it's because at some early point in their lives, they learned that when you make decisions, that's when you make mistakes. So when you stick your neck out and make a choice, the choice is A or B, and you choose choice B. We've learned that there's always somebody who doesn't like your choice. Well, now, I think, or that's a stupid thing to do, and so many of us have just gone to a default of, I'm not going to make any choice at all. Now, true, we may not make much forward progress in life, we may not learn much, but we avoid criticism because, the withdrawal of approval and the voicing of disapproval are just, a couple of the most painful things on the planet. So, don't make them. Now, there's another version of not making decisions, which is a little more active. Sounds silly to refer to not doing something as active, but that's what some people would call passive-aggressive. And so, like when somebody is pushed to make a decision, let's say that a process is continuing, and we've gone through step A, B, C, D, and now it's time to make a decision here at step E. These people love the power of being the obstacle to a process. These are the people who make it almost impossible to pass some forms of legislation. These are the people in committee who when it's time for them to accomplish the thing, they don't ever do their step, and they just sit there and block everything and enjoy it. Now, there's a difference between avoiding disapproval and this form. These are the people who just really love having a sense of power over other people by not doing what has to be done. Now, which is he doing? The second kind is less common. I would suggest probably because he's afraid of making a decision. We'll see as you write here. As far as Thanksgiving goes, the options we have are: 1, we could go to his parents' house. 2, we could make reservations and go out to dinner. 3, we could stay home and do something. And he won't commit to any of these. I find it aggravating. I can't understand why this is such a difficult situation to choose one or the other. I know, it does seem sort of easy, doesn't it? But that's because it seems easy to you. I told him that he gets to choose, as we are spending Christmas Eve with my family, and I want to make sure that he gets to do what he wants. And any of the above options are fine with me. I genuinely don't care which one he chooses. I'll do any of them, but I'd like to know what we're doing so I can plan. I told him how I feel, that I'm open to suggestions, and that there's not a wrong answer. But he's always considered the holidays what he calls I've never heard this before in all these years, the holidays. Apparently they were very stressful when he was growing up with his family. I know that this is probably part of the issue as to why he isn't making up his mind, if not the whole issue. So, you've answered the question that it is the former reason. That's at least the reason for his avoiding his parents' place. He doesn't want to go there. He doesn't want to go there and experience the misery of being with them. But he also doesn't want to choose not to go there, because then they're going to make him pay if he doesn't. So he's one of these people who's figured out that, oh man, no matter which road I go down, somebody's going to criticize me, so I won't make a choice. So I can tell you, honey, he's waiting for you to make the choice. Now, ironically, the people who sit around and wait for other people to make the choice are also often very quick to criticize yours, which is, especially interesting. So, about the Thanksgiving day, I would suggest that you offer him some choices, because he's already made it clear. You have to listen to him. He's saying, I won't make a choice. And when somebody avoids a choice with that kind of energy, it's out of fear. So he needs your help. So you say, if you don't have a choice or preference, then will you go along with my choice? Now, you have to understand that he may even not answer that question. If he says yes, great, you make the choice. If he doesn't give you any answer at all, you don't stop. You keep going. You can't just go with no decision. So you tell him what choice you are making. You're not making a choice for both of you. Do you see? And that's unfair to do, to ever tell our partner, this is what we are doing. But you can say, all right, since you have no preference, then I choose to stay home. I choose to go out. And then you make reservations for 2. Although you might say to him, for example, I wanted your input because if I go to, I'm not going to go to your parents without you. So that one's gone. I prefer not to go out to eat without you, so I'm going to stay home. And then you tell him that if you get to the day of Thanksgiving, and then he says, I wish that we'd gone to my parents, or we should have gone to my parents, you say, you tell him, I'm going to do this. If you say that, I'm going to put up my hand and go, don't even start with that. Boring. You had a chance to make the decision. Now, you can't do this angrily, or it's just going to be, I told you so. You had a chance, and you said, I could make the decision. So I'm telling you now ahead of time, I don't mind making it, but later on, don't tell me how you hate the decision I made. Now, he may still do that, but then you tell him ahead of time, you're going to stop him. Say, we were already at the place where you could make the decision. Now, that's just about Thanksgiving. When it comes to finances and things like that have to be done, you tell him that it simply has to be. It has to be accomplished, because the price of not making a decision is too high. You can't not talk about finances and then lose your house. So, with Thanksgiving, you could make a non-decision and you end up staying home, but not so with, mortgage payments and other things. So you explain that you understand, and even with the Thanksgiving decision, tell him you understand why he doesn't want to make this choice. Because no matter what he chooses, there's going to be some downside, and then he'll feel responsible. It can really be a sweet thing for you to finally tell him that you get it, why he feels this way, as opposed to you're just being, in your own words, aggravated about it. And so see, when you express aggravation about his not making a decision, think, what do you think he's going to be afraid of if he makes one? Your aggravation. And everybody else's who isn't going to like it. So tell him that you get it and that you've probably contributed to his fear of making decisions. You might even think of a time or two when he's made one and then you've been critical and made him feel bad. This might be your first opportunity ever to express genuine understanding of one of his fears. So grab hold of it, sweetie. This can be fun. But then what you do is you tell him, like with finances, you say, this has to be done. And most people who don't like making decisions, as I said, ironically, don't like to have them made for them. So you can't just say, all right, so we have to talk about the finances right now, because that comes across as really demanding for somebody who's already a frightened person. What you can do is this. You can say, we've got to talk about it, and so let me give you three choices. We can talk about it right now, which he's never going to choose. We can talk about it tomorrow at 7, or we can talk about it Saturday at 3. You give him three choices. Which of those would you like to do? And if, well, I don't care. Great. So tomorrow at 7. So tomorrow at 7, we are going to have a discussion about finances. Do you agree that that needs to be done? Well, how could he not? So tomorrow at 7, we will meet in this place. And I can tell you, wherever you are, he probably won't be there. So you'll have to go find him. And if he says, well, this isn't a good time, you say, this was the time we set. This is just like a business appointment of any other kind. And I understand you're not wanting to do it. Talking about finances is about as fun as having a colonoscopy for most of us. But we have to. Or it gets worse later. We can pay the price now, or later it can be just 3 times as bad. And so you have to make it happen. And then don't be annoyed because he doesn't show up at the appointed time and in the appointed place, because he's going to try to avoid it. You're going to have to be the leader on difficult decisions. It's just the way it is, honey. Last weekend, this viewer says, I learned about a terrible situation that my ex-husband was hiding from me and our children. When he told me the news, my first thought was for how it would impact our children, but my second was compassion for him in his pain. I think I handled it pretty well, expressing my true concern for him and offering what insight I could, including asking if he wanted to listen to some of my real love materials. I would like to know if it's healthy to continue to support my ex while he's in pain. It feels wrong, but I don't know why. If your ex comes to you in pain and you offer to give him some emotional support, suggestions, wisdom, insight, and he welcomes it, fine. As long as he doesn't then become confused that you're supporting him is initiating a new relationship. That is, if that's not what you want. So just be careful to not get mixed up about why you're doing it. And if he resists you, well, then let it go. And if he chooses to be in pain, well, he gets to. People get to choose to suffer. You might also ask him, so who's going to tell the children about this? Will you be telling them, or will I be telling them? If it, genuinely affects them. If he's like the woman who just asked me the question about a husband who doesn't like make decisions, and if he doesn't want to tell them, and he says, well, I don't know, then you say, well, you have a choice. I'm going to tell them on Friday, or you can tell them before then. That is, if it's something that they really need to know. Let me throw that in there, because if they don't really have to, well, even though it affects them, sometimes kids don't need to know details like that. Just don't get confused about the emotional reasons that you're helping them or attached to his response. Here's a woman who writes, the email below was sent to me last Friday by my best friend. I've experienced feelings all across the board, from anger, fear, wanting to be right, defend myself, feeling like a victim, wanting to attack. Yeah, that's quite a variety. and seeing things more clearly and understanding that I'm still lovable with the choices that other people make. After talking to several wise men and women about this situation, though, I'm a bit confused about whether I should respond to this email. So now we'll read the email of your best friend to you. Your friend said, I got your voicemail. You and I have been friends for 7 or 8 years now. I know you, how you act, and what to expect from you. I thought, this is my weekend. It's my birthday. This is my girl. I assume she means you. She is learning how she needs to be loved and how to love, and we won't have any issues. And at the end of the day, even though I had an attitude, there were still no issues, which I assume she means no conflicts. I just had to remind myself that I know you, how you act, and what to expect from you. So it sounds like she was exercising at least some measure of acceptance, or at the least tolerance. And apparently some behavior of yours, or more than one behavior, on her birthday triggered some inconvenience and annoyance in her. She continues, I know that when you have a boyfriend, I should not expect to hear from you unless your relationship is on the rocks, or on the outs, or sour. Now, don't get involved in the details. This is where we get mixed up. We say, well, no, that's not quite true. What is she really telling you? She's saying she feels used. She's saying when you're occupied with other people and things, you don't pay her attention. Only when you need something is when you call her. And if this is your best friend, and she's known you all these years, and you described her as your best friend, you might want to listen and examine yourself and consider whether this might be true about you. It doesn't have to be entirely true. And we always have extenuating circumstances. Well, I was having a bad day, blah. But, if after all these years she's finally decided to unburden herself, this has been going on a while. And it's worthwhile when somebody close to us tells us that we're doing a thing. They may be inaccurate to some extent, but there's usually something to it. She writes, I know that when we go out, that if you are not the center of attention, you're not happy and ready to pout and go home. So instead of defending yourself, because you're probably hearing you always do this. No, don't do that. Just think. Has there ever been a time when you've been out with her when you have pouted, sulked, gotten quiet, and then gone home early? It's unlikely she would make it up. If you can't think of a time, then it would be appropriate to ask her to tell you the time, rather than saying, no, I don't. As soon as we say, no, I don't, we don't learn anything. So there's at least something to think about here, something to learn, potentially. She continues, I know that if you're in a mood or you feel some type of way about things, that instead of openly communicating what you feel, you show out by becoming defensive or putting up a wall. So again, this is the fourth way now she's told you that you're selfish when it comes to your relationship with her. So, again, she may not be entirely right, but there's probably something to this. And you would have to be just nakedly honest about it to see it. And if so, a lot to learn. She continues, you called me the day of my birthday with no regard to what I was doing or how I was feeling and cried to me about something that was inevitable. Bob, your current boyfriend, I'm guessing, telling you that he's not into creating a routine. And again, she's telling you, you didn't think of me, you called up and you just thought of yourself. That's the essence of her message, which has been 5 different ways. She writes, you recommended going to the spa. You had me loop everybody in, and then you flaked out and didn't show up. So if that's true, that would possibly be an indication of not being considerate on your part and would be something to look at. She continues, I watched your friend ask you if he could get you a drink, and you didn't even consider the people that you were with. You unbuckled your seatbelt as if to say you couldn't drive to breakfast because I said we were going with Corey, and the list continues. And see, the details really don't matter so much. It's a lot of descriptions of selfishness. It can be a blessing if we see them. It'd be unlikely that they're all untrue, unless you're, dealing with a narcissistic personality disorder that requires other people to do everything she wants. Just something to think about. And then she just continues on with some other ways that she's unhappy. I can't be around selfish people like this, she said. I'm running low when it comes to our friendship. So there's a message here. If it's even partly true, I would call her and get together with her and say, I do that. I often don't pay attention to you. That's a fact. Don't argue about some of the details that may not be true. Go, yeah, I do that. In fact, would you be willing to tell me more about this one? Whatever line it is we were reading. I don't remember that one. So tell me about that so I can learn from it, as opposed to I didn't do it. Could be quite a learning experience for you, and certainly an opportunity for you to expose yourself to being unconditionally loved. You have nothing to lose by doing it. If you say, gosh, my bad, my mistake, and she becomes hateful, well, you aren't going to keep that friend anyway. But if she loves you even more, wow, what a cool thing you did to make that happen. Here's somebody who says, I just left a 5-year marriage with somebody that I care deeply about. He's grieving heavily, and my instinct is to run back to him to alleviate his suffering. I know that being together is not right, but I feel guilty for ending this marriage, and I feel somewhat responsible for his pain. Should I stay away from him and let him go through this process alone? Well, the key is whether it's the right thing for you to stay or leave. So I can't tell you whether it's the right thing. You're the one who's in the situation, so I can't tell you that. But if it is the right thing, as you say, well, then you're done. And the more time that you spend with him, especially if he's grieving, the more time you spend with him, the more he will see that as indications that you're willing to get back together with him, and you'll just confuse him. I do think it's worth, on one occasion, maybe two, but you can do this in one, if you can sit with him and just tell the truth about yourself. Say, I'm leaving the relationship because of these difficulties that I've had in our relationship, and I want to tell you, because I'm sure you've already told him what part is his responsibility. I don't think you need to go over that again. Tell him what part is your responsibility. Say, had I been more loving, I would have behaved this way. Had I been more loving, I wouldn't have been irritated, angry, withdrawn, criticized you. I would have been more kind. I would have, all of that. Tell him that and say, I just didn't have that much to give. And I felt like if I stayed, I wouldn't have been able to continue to grow. So my mistake. Had I been a more loving person, this might have succeeded, but I wasn't. So you tell the truth about yourself, but you're not his counselor. You're not his rehabilitation center. And if you really decided to go, then go. And if you're not sure about whether it's the right thing, you might try telling him the truth about yourself completely once and see if that makes any difference and see if you can be more loving. But I'm not trying to change your mind about that, not at all. That's your decision to make. Here's somebody who says, I struggle with where this line is drawn. While sometimes it is very difficult, I find that allowing people to have the freedom to choose for themselves is peaceful. It really is. Not controlling people is just heaven. However, when my responsibility is placed into the mix, it complicates things for me. Well, sure. If other people are making mistakes and they don't affect me, and it's none of my business, I'm not in a supervisory position over that person, then, on the whole, I just have to let people make mistakes. And often, the best way for people to learn is even when they are making mistakes that affect me, it is often true that the best thing to do is to still leave them alone and just love them. Because most of the time people make bad decisions out of emptiness and fear. So the more I support them, the better the choices they make. And we really don't trust that. That's why we control people. I was working with a couple not long ago, and every time she'd do anything that he didn't like, he'd reach out with an iron fist and shake her by the throat and say, "You can't do that." Well, how do you think she responded to that? She would respond by not doing exactly what he wanted and then withdrawing. And if he kept it up, she would explode and just rage back at him. Well, that didn't work very well. So I said to him, if you want to see a difference in both you and her, then you have to allow her to make her own choices. And he, of course, would say, "But what if she doesn't make the choice I like?" Then you have to shut up. And he just couldn't do it. He couldn't let go. He was so terrified of not getting what he wanted until finally, after hours of this, he finally decided, okay, I'll let her go a little bit. And I won't bring up whatever it was and something else. Sure enough, as she felt more cared for, she felt less controlled, she gave him, make up a number, 81% of what he wanted. And he was amazed. And then he thought, well, now that I have 81% of what I want, maybe I should grab her by the throat for the remaining 19%. No, that's not going to work. So he began to learn by practicing that the more he loved her, the more loving she became. Just because it's the right thing to do, not because she was paying him back. It's not loving in return. Her natural inclination to love was able to blossom when he didn't try to beat it out of her, because you can't beat unconditional love out of anybody. Now, you continue. You said, for example, let's say that I see somebody robbing a bank. Is it my responsibility to call the police, or is it not? I could just watch the event play out and move on. I witness a father beating a child. My responsibility is to call the police and do what I can to end the physical violence to the child, or is it not? And we're going to go through a number of examples here, but some sort of overarching principles would be that, yes, on the whole, we have to allow other people to make their choices. But when I'm affected, or when the group I'm a part of is affected, so in other words, society at large is affected, then I do get to speak. But you see, you could really carry that to to ridiculous extremes. You could say every time somebody says the wrong thing, it affects all mankind. Well, that's a little ridiculous. But when they're robbing a bank, that does affect a lot of people. And I do have a responsibility, I believe, to speak up, or I contribute to the chaos in the world. But I still have to consider whether I can do it in a loving way and what the price of my speaking out is. So I don't speak up about the bank. A lot of people are adversely affected. There's increased panic, increased crime, a sense of lawlessness. That's a pretty heavy effect. But if somebody's simply making a mistake, for example, in describing an event or a place, many people feel compelled to correct them. Why? You have to consider the cost. So what if they speak the wrong thing? So what if when I'm listening to somebody they say it's 200,000 miles to the moon? And I know that it's 249,000, which actually isn't entirely right either, because it actually turns out that the moon has a varying distance of several thousand miles from the Earth. So sometimes it's 249, sometimes it's 247, but it's about 250,000 miles. Is it really necessary for me to speak up and say, no, it's 250,000 miles? That's ridiculous. The only reason for me to tell anybody that is to show them that I know more. It's not like they're planning a rocket shot to the moon, or they wouldn't be getting it wrong in the first place. It's not like you're talking to a NASA engineer. So we need to consider whether it's important enough and whether it's our business before we decide that we're going to speak up. And sometimes even whether they can hear it. So let's say that it is my business, my child makes a mistake, I do need to speak up, but I'm angry. Well, see, even then, I have a responsibility to speak, But if I speak angrily, I will hurt the child. So I need to wait till the time that I can speak in a loving way. There's a lot involved. The price, whether it's my business, whether I can do it in a loving way, whether the other person can hear it. And then I need to ask, when I'm not directly affected, still, is it my business? And we'll get to some examples that you provided here in a second. So, do we call the police if a father's beating a child? I would. If a father just reached down and swatted a child in the butt, it may not be my favorite parenting technique, but there have been people who called the police for stuff like that. And that's just kind of silly. I mean, sure, the child may be emotionally wounded, but children are just as emotionally wounded with the look of daggers from our eyes. So here's another one. If I hear two people planning on destroying someone's life by telling a husband that his wife is an alcoholic and is endangering their young child with her addiction and actions, do I have a responsibility to speak? Because they're not breaking the law. In that case, it certainly doesn't directly affect me. Certainly it doesn't affect society. This is one man and one woman and their relationship. And these other people are deciding to tell him, well, that's just not my business. Unless they turn to me and they say, so, what do you think? Oh, well, then I'll tell them. But to butt into a conversation, oh, wow, unless we're in a real life setting, I just don't do it. Even if I've got a fairly strong opinion on the subject. Once in a while, I'll offer just a casual comment. Well, it's been my experience that blank. And if it's obvious they want to hear more, I'll talk some more. But if they don't, I'm done. I'm not going to argue with them and try to be right. It turns out that in this particular case, even if their intent is to be malicious by telling the husband about a drunken wife, they may end up saving the life of the child. So, that's a touchy choice for them. But it would not be a touchy choice for me to correct them. No, that's their business. They want to be snotty, they can be. Here's an example you say of a child throwing a bottle of water into a yard when his parents are not looking. Is it my business or responsibility or not? Now, is it my business? If he throws it into my yard, yes. Then, if the kid did it just once, I would just pick the bottle up, pitch it back over the fence, and say, you need to not throw things into my yard. And I would just teach the child on the spot. Now, if the child had done this several times, then I'd take the bottle over to the parents' house and give it to the parents and say, your child keeps throwing things over in the yard, so how would you like me to handle this? Because the choices are that you can talk to the child about not throwing things into my yard, or I will just take the things and I'll throw them away, even if it's something that's valuable. So, and you would need to do this with no sense of confrontation. You go setting up demarcation lines. Anything that goes over that fence is mine. You do that, and then can't you just see one day one of your kids or grandkids, takes your car and throws it over the fence, something that you like, and then your neighbors go, remember the rules you set up? So be careful about any sense of confrontation here. But I wouldn't make such a big deal about it unless, if the kid threw it into a neighbor's yard, no, I'm not going to say anything about it. It's not my business. Now, if my neighbor ever says to me, I have these bottles that keep appearing in my yard, I'd sure tell him where the bottles came from. And then you said, once I informed the parents and they ignored the behavior, I would be okay with it because that would be their choice. Yes. So good question. Because people love to have the freedom to choose, but they don't like to be responsible for their own choices. They want everybody else to be. Here's a viewer who says, I've been curious why there isn't a separate real love and addiction book. Seems to me that the needs of that community are somewhat unique. I know for myself, in the face of the stress of school and my inability at times to connect well with people in or outside of that community, I find myself zoning out by watching TV for hours, or eating more than I need to, or clinging to people, all out of a lack of love. At the same time, the shame of doing that seems to have unique effects, especially when someone has been involved in the past with 12 steps or other programs. Curious what you would say about real love that may be unique or different to that audience, and if you'd ever considered writing a book specifically targeted to that group. In time, maybe, but it's really all there. It's all in the Real Love book. It's in the Real Love for Wise Men and Women. It's in Real Love and Freedom for the Soul, about victimhood. That all of the getting and protecting behaviors, and this is, I'm pretty sure, in several of the books, all of the getting and protecting behaviors and all of the forms of imitation love that's what all the addictions are. That's all they are. We become addicts not because we have a disease. We become addicts because we found something that will alleviate our pain. And when it relieves our pain consistently, we find ourselves compulsively doing it because we hate pain. I mean, we can't tolerate pain. You can count on somebody responding to pain. So we become addicted to things that make it go away. And the treatment for those is found in all the books, in the marriage book, the Real Love book, and so on. And it might be worth doing a book sometime to just go through all the addictions, much like the Real Love and Freedom for the Soul goes through specifics about victimhood. So might be worth it. We'll see. It's a good thought, and but the treatment is still getting loved. And telling the truth to people, because the more that I tell the truth to somebody about how, for example, I eat, or how I avoid conflict, or how I lie, or how I run, or how I use porn, or whatever, as I talk to people and feel accepted and loved for my flaws, mistakes, my emptiness, my compulsion to use any addiction gradually gets less. And I've heard that from so many thousand people that I know it to be consistently true, and it might still be beneficial to write a book just to addicts. Still is. Still a good idea, so thanks for that. Now, I can't put your name in the acknowledgments because I don't know who you are. Today, my boyfriend, new viewer, told me that tomorrow night, Friday night, he has a few, obviously I got this on Thursday, has a few things to do, so he won't be able to come over to see me until later in the evening on Friday. But I have to work the next day on Saturday, so when he comes over late, that really limits the time we get to spend together on the weekend. How do I tell him what I want, that I want him to come over earlier on Friday, without being demanding? I feel like he's putting his errands before our time together. In other words, prioritizing his stuff over our relationship. So I talk a lot about the difference between demands and requests, but it occurs to me that I probably don't talk enough about the third choice. So we know what a demand is, and that's where, well, I'm just sick and tired of you putting your priorities before mine, and I want you to come over Friday night. That works poorly. Then you could do a request. You could say, I would really appreciate it if you would come over early Friday night instead of doing your errands during that time. But we have to remember that even when we phrase a request perfectly, I would just appreciate it. You can do whatever you want. That's just what I would like. When we're talking to somebody who values our approval, attention, acceptance, and you're talking to somebody who's not entirely emotionally whole, which would apply to about everybody, when you make a request like that, they feel pressured. Even when you can make a request, it's common for the other person not to feel a request, not hear, feel. And so if you say that to him, he's going to be going, So you may be requesting, but he's going to be like, oh man, she wants me to do this, so I can't say no. So there's another way you can do it. and that's to ask a genuine question. And I do this with people on the phone all the time. I do it with Donna, I do it with friends, I do it all the time. And I say to them, I have a question for you. And I preface it by saying, I am not even asking you to do this, because I don't really even have the right to ask you to do it till I've gathered this piece of information. Do you see what I'm saying? If you ask somebody to do something and there's no way they could do it, and you put pressure on them, that's pretty unfair. So I tell people, it's a question. I'm gathering information, and then I'll decide whether I'm even going to ask you something. So just answer my question. And the more I do that, and the more accurately I phrase it, the more people are simply answering my questions without feeling pressured. I love that when they do that. And so you might say to him, would it be possible for you to do your errands tomorrow while I'm working, as opposed to tonight? If you were to do that, we would have, now you're giving him some information. We would have more time together, but I'm just trying to find out how big an inconvenience that would be. So, for example, if he said, oh, I can only go do this one errand on Friday night, that's what you want to know. Then, if that's the only time he can do it for the next 6 years, you wouldn't even make the request, because then he'd feel pressured. So first you ask the question, then you decide, well, so would you be willing to do that? Now, that's not a question. That's a request. Even though they both go up at the end and a question mark, just because it is doesn't make it a question. We say this, I hear this from people all the time. Well, I was only asking a question. No, you weren't. No, when somebody's doing something, for example, and you don't like the way they're doing it, you say, oh, why are you doing it that way? And then they get offended. You say, I was just asking. No, you weren't. No, you were saying, I don't approve of the way you're doing it. And I want to tell you how I would do it. That's what you're really saying. But we don't have the guts to say that. So we put it in the form of a question to look more innocent. So I just suggest that to you. And then you explore. You work it out. This next question is going to take more than a couple minutes. So we'll get to it next time. Been delightful. As usual, you ask brilliant and insightful questions that are beneficial to me and hopefully beneficial to others who are listening, and eventually to those who will be listening and watching the archives for years to come. So thanks again for being here. Always a pleasure. And between now and a week from today, when we meet again, just remember that it's always about real love. See you then.